The Vorthak had built their civilization on the principle that every problem possessed a logical solution. Their cities gleamed with mathematical precision. Their fleets moved in perfect formation, and their scientists had eliminated disease, aging, and poverty through methodical application of reason, which made the current situation particularly galling. "Status report," Commander Thex-9 announced as the Emergency Council materialized around the holographic conference table. The assembled xenobiologists, plague specialists, and military advisors flickered into existence from across the hegemony's 17 core worlds, those that remained habitable anyway. Dr. Kel Prime adjusted her data streams, watching infection vectors cascade across star maps like spilled blood. "The Crimson Rot has consumed 43% of our inhabited systems. Projected total extinction: 6 months, 14 days, 7 hours. Treatments?" Thex-9's mandibles clicked with barely controlled frustration. "Exhausted." Chief Medical Researcher Vex-7 transmitted his findings directly into the shared consciousness network. "Quantum sterilization fields, molecular restructuring, genetic resequencing, temporal isolation chambers, nothing slows the pathogen's advance." The Crimson Rot defied every principle of Vorthak medicine. It wasn't alive, wasn't dead, wasn't quite energy, and wasn't entirely matter. It simply consumed cellular structures while simultaneously rewriting DNA into increasingly chaotic patterns. Worse, it seemed to evolve specifically to counter each treatment they deployed, as if the plague possessed malicious intelligence. "Perhaps, Doctor," Kel Prime ventured, her usually confident tone wavering, "we should consider alternative perspectives." The silence that followed carried the weight of impending extinction. "Alternative how?" Thex-9 demanded. "Non-Vorthak perspectives." General Zar 4 materialized more solidly, his projection bristling with indignation. "You suggest consulting the Nexari?" Their medical knowledge peaked millennia ago. "Not the Nexari." Kel Prime's neural patterns betrayed her reluctance. "The humans. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story." The conference chamber's environmental controls couldn't prevent the collective shudder that rippled through every attendee. Humans. Those bizarre primates from the third planet of an unremarkable system, whose mere existence challenged every assumption about intelligent life. The Deathworlders? Vex-7's medical sensibilities recoiled. Their homeworld harbors more lethal organisms per cubic meter than most biological warfare laboratories. Precisely. Kel Prime transmitted footage from Earth. Humans deliberately exposing themselves to pathogens, children playing in dirt teeming with bacteria, adults consuming fermented substances that would kill most civilized species. Look at their medical practices. The images were horrifying. Human doctors intentionally infected patients with weakened diseases. They transplanted organs from corpses. They introduced living bacteria into sterile digestive systems and called it therapeutic. Most shocking of all, they seemed to thrive on this controlled chaos. Their approach to disease treatment appears— Kel Prime searched for diplomatic phrasing. Aggressively unconventional. "Insane," Vex-7 corrected. "They weaponize their own immune systems." "And they have the lowest extinction rate in the known galaxy," Kel Prime countered. "Despite inhabiting a planet that actively tries to kill them daily." Commander Thex-9 studied the data streams. Human medical history read like a catalog of impossibilities. They'd eradicated diseases by deliberately spreading modified versions. They'd conquered cancer by teaching immune systems to recognize and destroy their own cells. They'd eliminated organ rejection by convincing bodies to accept foreign tissue as native. Their success rates are— He paused, mandibles working silently. Statistically impossible. Unless you factor in variables no rational species considers, Kel Prime added. Risk tolerance approaching absolute zero self-preservation. Willingness to experiment on themselves. Treatment protocols that prioritize effectiveness over safety by margins that would trigger automatic medical license revocation in civilized space. The holographic displays shifted to show human hospitals. The Vorthak watched in fascination and horror as medical practitioners performed procedures that violated every principle of sterile technique. They reintroduced beneficial bacteria to patients. They deliberately triggered immune responses. They treated symptoms by causing different, supposedly more manageable problems. It's barbaric, General Tsar 4 observed, and it works. Dr. Vex 7 transmitted his analysis reluctantly. Human immune systems demonstrate adaptability coefficients exceeding our most optimistic projections. They've survived plagues that would have eliminated the Vorthak entirely. Because they don't fight disease, Kel Prime explained. They negotiate with it. Form alliances. Turn pathogens against each other. They've essentially domesticated their own microbial ecosystem. The implications were staggering. Where Vorthak medicine sought to eliminate variables through precise control, humans seemed to embrace chaos as a therapeutic tool. They treated their bodies like ecosystems rather than machines, accepting that health might require a balance of competing forces rather than sterile perfection. The cultural barriers alone. General Tsar 4 transmitted his concerns. Humans view medical treatment as entertainment. They celebrate procedures that would traumatize most species. They volunteer for experimental treatments that carry mortality rates exceeding acceptable parameters. Which might be exactly what we need, Commander Thex 9 concluded grimly. The Crimson Rot counters logical approaches. Perhaps illogical approaches might achieve different results. Dr. Vex 7 pulled up human medical journals, their contents reading like creative fiction to Vorthak sensibilities. They describe treatment protocols involving controlled infections, deliberate tissue damage, and therapeutic introduction of toxins. Their definition of acceptable side effects includes temporary death. Temporary death? General Tsar 4's confusion rippled through the network. Cardiac arrest followed by resuscitation, Kel Prime clarified. They stop their hearts to perform certain procedures, then restart them afterward. Routinely. The Vorthak processing cores struggled with the concept. Death was binary, a state from which no recovery was possible. Yet humans treated it as a temporary inconvenience, a minor obstacle to overcome during medical procedures. Their entire medical philosophy contradicts basic biological imperatives, Vex 7 observed. They intentionally introduce foreign substances, welcome parasitic organisms, and seem genuinely enthusiastic about procedures that would qualify as torture in most civilizations. Commander Thex 9 made his decision with the weight of species survival pressing against his consciousness. Initiate diplomatic contact. Inform the humans we require consultation regarding the Crimson Rot. Sir, General Tsar 4 interjected, humans have no experience with off-world pathogens. Their medical knowledge, while creative, remains limited to Earth-based organisms. True, Thex 9 acknowledged, but they have experience with impossible problems. And according to our data, impossible problems are precisely what humans consider recreational challenges. The conference began dissolving as participants returned to their respective duties. Dr. Kel Prime remained behind, studying human medical footage with the fascination of someone watching a controlled apocalypse unfold in slow motion. "Commander," she transmitted privately, "what if their methods don't translate to Vorthak physiology?" Thex 9's response carried the dry resignation of someone who'd already calculated the alternatives. "Then we'll die, according to established medical protocols, instead of dying while violating every principle of civilized treatment. Somehow, I doubt our extinction will be comforted by the knowledge that we maintained proper sterile technique until the end." The transmission ended, leaving Dr. Kel Prime alone with her data streams, and the growing suspicion that salvation might require abandoning everything the Vorthak thought they knew about staying alive. The human research station orbiting Titan looked exactly like what it was, a collection of functional modules held together by engineering pragmatism and mild contempt for aesthetic design. Dr. Elena Vasquez floated in the observation deck, coffee bulb in hand, watching the Vorthak diplomatic vessel approach with all the grace of a crystalline cathedral built by obsessive-compulsive architects. "Well, that's either the prettiest ship I've ever seen or the most neurotic," she announced to her colleagues. 10 credits says they sterilized their hull twice before leaving home. Dr. Marcus Chen pushed off from the bulkhead, already pulling up preliminary files on Vorthak physiology. 20 says they brought their own air supply because they don't trust our atmospheric processors. "Sucker's bet," replied Dr. Yuki Tanaka, not looking up from her bacterial culture arrays. "Of course they did. Question is whether they brought backup air supplies for their backup air supplies." The docking sequence proceeded with mathematical precision that would have impressed a Swiss watchmaker. When the airlock finally cycled open, 3 Vorthak representatives emerged wearing environmental suits that probably cost more than most human research budgets. "Greetings," the lead figure announced through a translation matrix that rendered emotion in carefully modulated tones. "I am Medical Coordinator Nex Prime. We come seeking consultation regarding a pathogenic crisis threatening our civilization." Elena gestured toward the conference room with her coffee bulb. "Sure thing. Fair warning, though. Our coffee's terrible. Our furniture wasn't designed for your anatomy, and we're probably going to suggest treatments that'll make you question our sanity." "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus muttered under his breath. "Diplomatic protocols." "What?" "I'm being diplomatic. I didn't mention the smell." The Vorthak delegation exchanged rapid communications through neural links, their translation matrices working overtime to process concepts like terrible coffee and questionable sanity in the context of life-or-death medical consultation. "Perhaps," Nex Prime ventured, "we could review your facilities first?" "Absolutely." Elena led them through the station's medical bays, cheerfully narrating procedures that caused visible distress among the visitors. "This is where we keep our tissue cultures. That's our bacterial warfare division. Totally legitimate research, by the way. And this beauty is our infectious disease lab." Through the observation windows, Vorthak eyes processed scenes that challenged their understanding of sterile medical environments. Human researchers worked with active pathogens using protection that seemed inadequate by any civilized standard. Worse, they appeared to be enjoying themselves. "Your containment protocols?" Medical specialist Cav 8 began. "Are adequate for human stupidity levels," Yuki interrupted, emerging from a sealed chamber while pulling off gloves that had definitely seen better days. "Which, statistically speaking, covers most biological threats we're likely to encounter." Dr. Chen activated the holographic displays, showing Earth's disease history with charts that resembled battlefield reports. "So you've got an extinction-level pathogen that adapts to counter your treatments. Been there, done that, bought the commemorative plague mask. You faced similar threats?" Nex Prime's interest spiked through the translation matrix. "Honey, we are the threat most of the time," Elena laughed. "Show them the Black Death projections, Marcus." The historical data revealed humanity's relationship with pandemic disease as a series of increasingly desperate gambles that somehow paid off. The Vorthak watched humans survive plagues that should have eliminated them entirely, not through superior medicine, but through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to die properly. Your species survived by ignoring containment? Medical specialist Kav 8's confusion was audible. More like strategic surrender, Marcus explained. We let diseases think they were winning, then sucker punched them with evolutionary adaptations they didn't see coming. Yuki pulled up her current research, deliberately exposing laboratory mice to controlled versions of human pathogens to strengthen their immune responses. See, your problem is you're trying to fight clean. Disease doesn't fight clean. It cheats, adapts, and improvises. So we cheat back. Cheat how? Nex Prime demanded. Well, Elena settled back with obvious relish. First thing I'd try is introducing competing pathogens to your infected populations. Let them fight each other instead of fighting you. The Vorthak medical specialists recoiled, as if she'd suggested therapeutic nuclear bombardment. You would deliberately infect already sick individuals with additional diseases. Kav 8's translation matrix struggled with concepts of acceptable medical practice. Sure, happens naturally all the time. Ever heard of bacteriophages? Viruses that eat bacteria? We use them to treat infections that resist conventional antibiotics. It's like hiring an assassin to kill the guy who's trying to murder you. Dr. Chen added tactical details that increased Vorthak distress levels exponentially. We'd also want to examine your microbiome diversity. Most civilized species sterilize their internal ecosystems, which removes competitive pressure against invasive pathogens. Meaning? Nex Prime asked, though his tone suggested he dreaded the answer. Meaning we'd probably need to introduce Earth bacteria into Vorthak digestive systems, Yuki explained matter-of-factly. Create a hostile environment for your plague by populating your bodies with microorganisms that view real estate as a zero-sum game. The silence that followed could have been measured in geological epochs. You propose, medical specialist Kav 8 said slowly, to combat our extinction by introducing foreign bacterial colonies into our bodies? Among other things, Elena confirmed. We'd also want to trigger controlled immune responses, probably through exposure to modified versions of your plague. Train your immune systems to recognize and counter the pathogen before it adapts. Controlled exposure to the agent causing our extinction, Nex Prime repeated. Right, like a vaccine, but more aggressive and with higher casualty rates during the development phase. Marcus pulled up human vaccination history, showing mortality rates that would trigger immediate medical review boards in any civilized society. The key is finding volunteers willing to accept experimental treatments with significant risk factors. Risk factors, Kav 8 echoed. Death, mostly, Yuki admitted, but also potential genetic modification, permanent immune system alterations, and possible psychological effects from bacterial colony establishment. The Vorthak delegation processed this information with the same enthusiasm most species reserved for contemplating voluntary dismemberment. Your proposed treatments, Nex Prime said carefully, involve deliberate infection of healthy individuals with potentially lethal pathogens, introduction of foreign bacterial colonies, and acceptance of mortality rates that would constitute genocide under most legal frameworks. Elena nodded enthusiastically. That's the basic approach, yeah. Though we'd probably want to start with smaller test groups to refine the methodology. Test groups. Medical specialist Kav 8's translation matrix began developing what sounded like a stutter. Volunteers from your population willing to undergo experimental treatments, Marcus clarified. Probably want to start with individuals already infected, since they're facing certain death anyway. The Vorthak exchanged rapid neural communications that probably violated several privacy protocols. Dr. Vasquez, Nex Prime said finally, your suggested treatments appear to violate every principle of medical ethics established by civilized species. Elena shrugged, finishing her coffee. Medical ethics are great until they become extinction ethics. Your choice is pretty simple. Die according to proper protocols, or live according to improper ones. And if your treatments fail, then you die faster, but at least you'll have died trying something new. Plus, we'll learn valuable information about pathogen behavior that might help the next species facing similar problems. Dr. Chen activated additional displays showing human medical philosophy in action. Look, the universe doesn't care about our comfort zones. It throws problems at us that require solutions outside our normal parameters. You can maintain medical purity right up until there's nobody left to maintain it for. Yuki sealed her bacterial cultures with practiced efficiency. Besides, you came to us because your rational approaches failed. We're the irrational option. If you wanted logical, predictable treatments, you'd have stayed home and died with dignity. The harsh truth settled over the Vorthak delegation like a lead blanket. Their civilization faced extinction because they'd exhausted every reasonable approach to an unreasonable problem. The humans offered unreasonable solutions that might work precisely because they abandoned reason entirely. We would, Nex Prime said slowly, require detailed protocols and safety parameters. Elena's grin could have powered a small spacecraft. Safety parameters are negotiable. Protocols we can definitely provide. When do you want to start? 3 weeks later, the makeshift laboratory aboard the Vorthak medical ship looked like the result of a collision between a sterile surgical suite and a particularly enthusiastic mad scientist's workshop. Human equipment sprawled across precision-engineered surfaces with the aesthetic sensibility of a garage sale, while Vorthak monitoring systems hummed their disapproval at every irregular reading. Subject 7 is experiencing what we'd classify as aggressive immune response, Doctor. Vasquez announced, reviewing biometric data that would have triggered immediate medical intervention in any civilized hospital. Translation: his body is learning to fight back instead of just lying down and dying politely. Volunteer Vorthak researcher Pex-4 writhed in his containment pod, his crystalline integument shifting through color spectrums that probably indicated profound biological distress. According to human protocols, this counted as promising initial results. His cellular structures are rejecting the introduced bacterial colonies, Medical Coordinator Nex Prime observed, his tone carrying the weight of impending species extinction mixed with immediate regret about trusting humans. Yeah, that's normal, Yuki replied, calibrating something that looked suspiciously like a weaponized petri dish. Takes about 72 hours for the ecosystem to establish territorial boundaries. Think of it as microscopic urban planning, but with more violence. Dr. Chen monitored Subject 12, whose exposure to modified crimson rot samples was producing reactions that defied several laws of biology. Interesting. His immune system is actually communicating with the pathogen. They're negotiating. Negotiating? Nex Prime's translation matrix struggled with the concept. Chemical warfare followed by chemical diplomacy. The bacteria we introduced are essentially acting as intermediaries between his immune system and your plague. It's like having tiny ambassadors who speak fluent violence. The observation was both fascinating and terrifying. Where Vorthak immune systems had simply been overwhelmed by the Crimson Rot's adaptive capabilities, human bacterial reinforcements were engaging in complex biological conversations that resulted in measured truces rather than total surrender. Subject 15 began manifesting symptoms that had never appeared in Vorthak medical literature. Her neural patterns displayed unprecedented activity levels, while her cellular regeneration rates accelerated beyond normal parameters. Is she dying or evolving? Medical specialist COV8 asked, watching readouts that resembled abstract art more than medical data. Both, probably, Elena answered cheerfully. Evolution's just dying really slowly while learning useful skills. She's developing hybrid immune responses that incorporate pathogen characteristics without succumbing to pathogen objectives. The implications were staggering. Instead of fighting the Crimson Rot directly, the experimental subjects were essentially recruiting it as an unwilling ally. Their immune systems were learning to exploit the plague's adaptive mechanisms for defensive purposes. This violates every principle of biological warfare, Nex Prime muttered, watching his people transform into something between their original forms and controlled biological weapons. Biological warfare assumes someone wins and someone loses, Marcus pointed out, adjusting bacterial culture concentrations with the casual precision of someone seasoning soup. We're aiming for biological détente. Everyone gets to exist, but nobody gets to dominate. Subject 22 achieved something unprecedented in Vorthak medical history. Her body began producing antibodies that actively reprogrammed Crimson Rot samples instead of destroying them. The plague, faced with the choice between adaptation and assimilation, chose a third option that amounted to surrender through transformation. Her immune system is teaching the pathogen to be useful, Yuki announced, reviewing cellular interaction data with obvious satisfaction. It's like converting enemy soldiers into medical support staff. The Vorthak medical team watched their volunteer subjects undergo changes that should have been impossible. Instead of dying from the treatments, they were developing biological capabilities that exceeded their species' normal parameters. They weren't just surviving, they were upgrading. Subject 31 is producing enzymes that don't exist in our biochemical databases, COV8 reported, his voice carrying notes of scientific excitement mixed with existential dread. Elena examined the readings, nodding approvingly. Hybrid proteins. His body's basically inventing new chemistry on the fly. The bacterial colonies are sharing genetic information with his cellular structures, creating biological solutions that neither species developed independently. The process resembled controlled evolution accelerated through deliberate biological chaos. The Vorthak subjects weren't just fighting disease, they were incorporating useful aspects of pathogenic adaptation while rejecting harmful elements through bacterial mediation. How is this possible? Nex Prime demanded, watching his people transform into something unprecedented. Because we stopped thinking about disease as an enemy, Marcus explained, adjusting treatment parameters that would have horrified ethics boards across the galaxy. Your civilization views pathogens as invaders to be repelled. We view them as neighbors to be managed, sometimes violently, but usually through negotiation. Subject 45 achieved something that qualified as miraculous by any species standards: complete symbiotic integration with both the introduced bacterial colonies and modified Crimson Rot samples. Her immune system had essentially domesticated an extinction-level pathogen and put it to work performing cellular maintenance duties. She's not just immune, Yuki announced, reviewing the data with scientific glee. She's weaponized. Her body can now produce targeted antibodies against any Crimson Rot variant while simultaneously generating beneficial mutations in response to environmental pressures. The volunteers had become something new, not quite Vorthak, not quite human bacterial colonies, and definitely not plague victims. They were hybrid organisms capable of biological functions that surpassed their original design parameters. The mortality rate, COV8 calculated grimly, approaches 37%. That's actually pretty good, Elena replied. First-generation experimental treatments usually hit 50% casualties minimum. Your people are remarkably adaptable once they stop trying to maintain biological purity. The survivors demonstrated capabilities that redefined Vorthak understanding of immune system potential. They could process toxins that would kill unmodified individuals, survive in environments that should have been lethal, and most importantly, they were completely immune to all known variants of the Crimson Rot. "We've created super soldiers," Nex Prime observed, watching his transformed volunteers display physical and mental capabilities that exceeded normal Vorthak parameters. "We've created survivors," Marcus corrected. "The enhancement effects are secondary benefits. Primary objective was avoiding extinction, which appears to have been achieved." Subject 61 provided the final proof of concept. When exposed to concentrated Crimson Rot samples that should have killed her within hours, she not only survived, but converted the pathogen into beneficial cellular enhancements that improved her cognitive processing speed and physical resilience. "Your plague," Elena announced with obvious satisfaction, "has just become your species' most valuable natural resource. Congratulations on successfully weaponizing extinction." The Vorthak medical team processed this information with the enthusiasm typically reserved for contemplating voluntary amputation. They had saved their civilization by fundamentally altering what their civilization meant. "The subjects will need ongoing monitoring," Yuki added, already planning follow-up studies. "Hybrid bacterial ecosystems require maintenance protocols, and the long-term effects of pathogen symbiosis haven't been fully documented." "Meaning?" Nex Prime asked, though his tone suggested he was developing immunity to shocking revelations. "Meaning your people might continue evolving in directions we haven't predicted. Could be beneficial, could be problematic, definitely going to be interesting from a research perspective." Dr. Chen began compiling treatment protocols for mass application across Vorthak populations. "We'll need production facilities for bacterial cultures, distribution systems for pathogen samples, and volunteer coordination for the next phase of treatments." The irony was not lost on anyone present. The Vorthak had approached humans seeking medical consultation, and instead received evolutionary acceleration through controlled biological warfare. They would survive extinction by becoming something unprecedented. "Dr. Vasquez," Nex Prime said finally, "your species' approach to medicine appears to be fundamentally transformative rather than preservative." Elena shrugged, already planning modifications for the next round of treatments. "Preservation's just transformation at a slower speed. We figured if change was inevitable, we might as well make it useful." 6 months after the first successful treatments, Commander Thex 9 stood in what had once been the hegemony's most sterile medical facility, watching his transformed citizens work alongside equipment that would have violated every safety protocol in Vorthak history. The irony tasted bitter. Salvation had required abandoning the very principles that defined Vorthak civilization. Population compliance with hybrid integration protocols exceeds 91%, reported Director Zeph 2, her own cellular modifications evident in the subtle luminescence patterns beneath her integument. Resistance movements cite concerns about species identity preservation. "Species identity," Thex 9 repeated, observing citizens whose enhanced immune systems had turned them into living biological laboratories. "What species are we preserving, exactly?" The question haunted every survivor. The enhanced Vorthak demonstrated capabilities that redefined their evolutionary potential, but they were no longer purely Vorthak. They were something unprecedented. A hybrid civilization that existed because they'd chosen transformation over extinction. "The humans have submitted their final consultation report," Zeph 2 transmitted, her modified neural pathways processing information at speeds that exceeded original design specifications. "They're recommending continued monitoring protocols and have requested permission to study long-term adaptation patterns." Thex 9 accessed the human documentation, which read like a field guide to controlled biological anarchy. Dr. Vasquez had concluded their involvement with typically understated observations about successful pathogen integration, and promising evolutionary trajectories, as if orchestrating species-wide transformation was merely another day at the laboratory. They're already moving on to new projects, he noted, reviewing human research proposals that included deliberate exposure studies with crystalline parasites, symbiotic integration experiments with energy-based life forms, and something called therapeutic planetary infection protocols. The humans had treated Vorthak extinction as an interesting puzzle, solved it through methods that violated civilized medical practice, and immediately shifted attention to the next impossible problem. Their casual approach to fundamental biological transformation suggested they viewed species evolution as recreational entertainment. Director, Thex9 requested, compile statistics on enhanced citizen capabilities compared to baseline Vorthak parameters. The data revealed transformations that challenged basic understanding of biological limitations. Enhanced citizens demonstrated improved cognitive processing, accelerated healing rates, resistance to environmental toxins, and, most remarkably, the two adapt to biological threats in real time through bacterial colony consultation. They had become living embodiments of controlled chaos, each individual hosting microscopic ecosystems that negotiated with external threats through chemical diplomacy. The crimson rot, once an extinction-level pathogen, now served as a biological enhancement system that improved citizen capabilities while preventing invasion by other diseases. The humans created us in their image, Zeph2 observed, her enhanced analytical capabilities processing implications that would have required committee deliberation in the original hegemony. We've become comfortable with biological uncertainty. The transformation extended beyond individual citizens to the entire civilization's approach to problem-solving. Where the original Vorthak had sought perfect solutions through methodical analysis, the enhanced population embraced experimental approaches that prioritized effectiveness over elegance. Emergency medical protocols now include controlled infection procedures, Thex9 noted, reviewing updated hegemony policies. Our hospitals stock bacterial weapons alongside traditional treatments, and mortality rates have decreased by 43%, Zeph2 added. Citizens with access to hybrid immune systems survive injuries and diseases that would have been fatal under previous medical paradigms. The enhanced Vorthak had inherited humanity's willingness to fight biology with biology, death with controlled death, and chaos with managed chaos. They'd learned to view their bodies as negotiable territories rather than sacred temples, opening possibilities that their original civilization would have considered blasphemous. What concerns me, Thex9 transmitted privately, is how easily we adapted to their methodology, as if we were always capable of this flexibility but had simply chosen not to access it. The observation carried disturbing implications. Perhaps the original Vorthak civilization's devotion to logical purity had been a choice rather than an evolutionary imperative. Perhaps every species possessed the capacity for controlled biological anarchy, but most chose the comfort of predictable limitations. The humans suggested we were overthinking survival, Zeph2 recalled. They treated species extinction as a resource management problem, rather than an existential crisis. That casual reframing had enabled solutions that would have been inconceivable under traditional Vorthak thinking. By refusing to treat their own biology as sacred, the humans had demonstrated that survival might require abandoning reverence for original design specifications. Dr. Vasquez left a personal message, Zeph2 added, transmitting Elena's final communication to the hegemony leadership. The message was characteristically brief. Thanks for the learning opportunity. Your people make excellent test subjects, much more cooperative than humans. Good luck with the whole figuring out what you are now thing. Try not to overthink it. Attached was a comprehensive database of human biological warfare techniques, symbiotic integration protocols, and therapeutic pathogen cultivation methods, along with contact information for other human research teams specializing in impossible medical problems. Thex-9 processed the casual dismissal of species-wide transformation as a learning opportunity, with something approaching admiration. The humans had approached Vorthak extinction with the same enthusiasm other species reserved for recreational activities, solved it through methods that redefined medical possibility, and departed as if orchestrating evolutionary miracles was routine. They're already responding to distress calls from the Nexari Confederation, Zeph-2 reported, accessing galactic communication networks. Apparently, their homeworld is being consumed by sentient mathematical equations that exist as biological entities. And the humans consider this treatable? Thex-9 inquired. Dr. Chen transmitted preliminary treatment suggestions involving deliberate infection with contradictory mathematical concepts and therapeutic introduction of logical paradoxes. The Nexari medical establishment is reportedly horrified. The pattern was becoming clear. Across the galaxy, species facing impossible problems would eventually discover that humans specialized in impossible solutions. They would learn, as the Vorthak had learned, that survival sometimes required abandoning everything that defined survival in the first place. Commander, Zeph-2 observed, we've become the second species to learn that humans don't solve problems. They transform them into different, hopefully more manageable problems. And ourselves in the process, Thex-9 added, watching enhanced citizens work alongside bacterial colonies that had once been extinction-level threats. We asked them to save our civilization. They taught us to save ourselves by becoming something else entirely. The enhanced Vorthak had inherited humanity's most dangerous gift, the ability to view impossibility as merely another variable to be managed through creative biological engineering. They were no longer the species that had built cities of mathematical precision, but they were also no longer the species that would have died according to proper protocols. Set course for the Nexari system, Thex-9 decided. If the humans have taught us anything, it's that impossible problems make excellent learning opportunities. Director Zeph-2's enhanced neural pathways processed the decision with satisfaction. The transformed Vorthak were no longer content to exist according to their original design specifications. They had learned humanity's most subversive lesson, that evolution was just extinction moving at a more convenient speed. As their vessels departed for new challenges, the enhanced Vorthak carried with them the understanding that survival might always require choosing transformation over preservation, chaos over order, and impossible solutions over dignified defeat. They had become, in their own way, as comfortable with controlled catastrophe as the species that had taught them to weaponize their own extinction. The universe, it seemed, was full of impossible problems waiting for species crazy enough to treat them as entertainment.